I call the honourable member for Stirling.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I rise to speak on the Appropriation Bill number 1, 2011-2012. And today, being the 1st of June, it is going up to the anniversary of when the government entered its second term. And this is Labor's 4th budget since they came to office. And of course, since that time, we've seen what amounts to the most record spending spree in Australian history. So I wanted to do a couple of things today. First, I wanted to talk just in a macro sense about how damaging this budget is for the national interest. Secondly, I wanted to say something about its negative effect on my electorate. And thirdly, I wanted to say something about its devastating effects on national security and border protection policies. In a macro sense, since coming to office, Labor has accumulated over $150 billion worth of deficits. That means to fund these deficits, they borrow $135 million per day, every day, 7 days a week, $135 million, which means that the Australian taxpayer will be spending $7.5 billion on interest payments by 2014. That's $7.5 billion that will be wasted every year on interest payments for a debt that Labor has run up since they came into office. $7.5 billion that, of course, could be spent on much more important things than the interest payments on Labor's debt. And, of course, that doesn't even begin to have a look at repaying the principal on that debt, which will, of course, will fall to us when we come to government, as it always does, because every time the Labor Party gets into government, they do exactly the same thing. They spend wastefully, they run deficits, they run up debt, they pay interest on that debt, and every time we are called to come into government and clean up their mess. And we will accept that burden again, Mr Deputy Speaker, although quite frankly it shouldn't be that way. The News Limited newspapers have revealed the total cost of Labor's wasteful spending in government programs alone, just in terms of failed programs, costs, and I'm talking about things like the home insulation disaster, the school halls disaster. Just for those failed programs alone, every household in my electorate will be liable for $567. So just for those failed programs, every household in Stirling is going to have to stump up $567 just to pay for that gross waste. This is a terrible indictment on the performance of the Rudd-Gillard government, and it's another example highlighting the fact that the current debt and deficit really is an astonishing squandering of the inheritance that Labor had when they came to office. The result of this wasteful spending and the result of this running up of debt and deficit is particularly falls on the shoulders of my home state of Western Australia. And you only need to look at the record of this government to see that they view Western Australia solely as a cash cow. Even last week, a Labor senator coming in through the doors confirmed this. Senator Doug Cameron from New South Wales came through the doors last Wednesday, and he said this: I will be arguing strongly that we can't have a position where, because of natural resources, because of luck, that one state can have a standard of living that is way beyond what everybody else can achieve, and everybody else is left to make it up how they can. It's not on. And this was what he said in response to the Western Australian government increasing the tax, just taking away the concession for the tax for the royalty on iron ore fines. Now that is a very good example about the way that the Labor Party looks at Western Australia. They think Western Australia should just pay their bills, and bills that they are running up at the astonishing rate that I've already outlined. Of course, when the Prime Minister comes to Western Australia, she pretends that she knows a little bit about what's going on there. And what is going on there is the most incredible economic transformation that any state in Australia has seen in the history of this country. And when she comes to Western Australia, she says that she would like to see Western Australia get its fair share. This is the same sort of thing that her predecessor, Kevin Rudd, said when he came to Western Australia. But of course their actions belie that rhetoric, because they only see Western Australia as a cash cow. Mr Deputy Speaker, obviously I don't have endless time today, and I could spend the rest of the time outlining about where Labor has failed Western Australia. But I do just want to highlight a couple of things, because it's a great example about sort of the damage that they're doing to my home state. First example, Labor excluded small miners and brokered a secret deal to impose a $10.5 billion mining tax. Now, the astonishing thing is they negotiated with BHP, Rio and Xstrata, and of course BHP, Rio and Xstrata ran rings around these people because they have no idea what they're doing. They ran rings around Wayne Swan, and the upshot of that was that they really won't be paying any of this tax. So the burden will fall on small miners, particularly in Western Australia. So that $10.5 billion won't be paid by the big resource companies, it will be paid by the junior miners, and quite frankly, the Western Australian mining community is outraged about it. $7 billion of this tax will come from Western Australia, so about 70% of this tax will come from one state. And what we get in return from this government is quite frankly contemptuous. Labor will return only 6 cents out of every dollar taken from Western Australia under the mining tax. So 70% of that tax will be paid by Western Australians, but we will get 6% of it back. Labor has failed to fix GST arrangements that see WA receive only 68 cents in the dollar we pay in GST, while other states, of course, receive equal to what they put in, or in the case of some states, they receive substantially more than they put in. Labor has broken their promise not to consider a carbon tax, which will, of course, drive up electricity prices in Western Australia and seriously damage the Western Australian economy, sadly for no net environmental benefit. Western Australia suffered because the Labor Party withheld $350 million in extra health funding because the Western Australian government refused to hand over the GST funding within the health agreement. They've announced a new detention centre at the town of Northam, which of course means that Western Australia bears far more of the burden for Labor's failed border protection policies. It's in Western Australian jails that people smugglers are incarcerated at the cost of the West Australian taxpayer. Western Australia houses more detention centres and more of the detention population than anywhere else within Australia. And we get very little in return for this funding, that we make to this Labor government, but also the fact that so little of that federal funding flows back to my state. The government announced 28 GP super clinics. Only 3 of those will be in Western Australia. And Western Australia will receive only 7% of GST revenue, and that will fall to under 6% in coming years. And of course, our contribution to that is significantly more. Mr Deputy Speaker, as I said, I could go on forever about the way this Labor government is doing bad things to Western Australia, but the truth is they really don't understand what's happening there. And the only way that Western Australia will get a fair go was when this government is turfed out. But fortunately, I can report that my fellow West Australians are very keen to do that, and will be coming for the members for Brand, the members for Perth and the members for Fremantle at the coming federal election. Not long after Kevin Rudd won the 2007 election, he actually stood in Kings Park, and there was adverts in the lead up to that election. He stood at Kings Park overlooking the city, and he promised Western Australians would not miss out on this government, but sadly the facts belie that. So look, if I could just turn to my electorate, Mr Deputy Speaker, my electorate of Stirling. And of course, if the coalition had won the last election, my electors would be substantially better off for all those reasons that I've outlined, but also due to the fact that the Labor Party made not one commitment to the electorate of Stirling in the last election campaign. So we went through the whole election campaign and the Labor Party didn't commit to spend $1 in my electorate of Stirling, and the Labor candidate there, astonishingly, didn't seem to have enough pull to be able to get her party to make any commitments, which was rather extraordinary considering I was on a relatively small margin. If we had won, of course, we would have addressed some of the electorate's concerns. We have in the past installed closed-circuit television cameras at crime hotspots, and we would have expanded that program throughout my electorate if we were given a chance to do so by forming government. We were going to increase funding for the City of Stirling for the security services that they run. We would have installed a synthetic playing surface at the Scarborough Sportsmen's Club, and we would have spent money upgrading local roads. Sadly, there's been endless promises from both state and federal Labor to upgrade local roads in my electorate, and not once have those promises been delivered upon. And it's been up to the Barnett government, the Barnett Liberal government, to fund some of those commitments without $1 of federal money, which is shameful considering that Labor has promised this to my constituents in every single federal and state election since 2004. So the Barnett government has come in and they will solely fund the overpass at Reid Highway and Mirrabooka Avenue. I'm very pleased that they're doing that, but again, I'm very disappointed that the federal government has not committed any money. If we were in government, we would have committed $10 million to that project. Crime remains one of the most prevalent concerns of my electors. And during the years of the Howard government, we pursued our best efforts to play a role, to have the Commonwealth Government play a role in fighting crime in our local communities. And we funded the City of Stirling's Safer Suburbs plan, which delivered more security patrols through local neighbourhoods, closed-circuit television cameras at Scarborough Beach and throughout the electorate, and also crime prevention measures such as electronic message boards and all-terrain vehicles. Unfortunately, the Labor Party has not shown the same sense of urgency when it comes to addressing the alarmingly high crime rates across Western Australia, across my electorate and also across the country as a whole. In the last federal election, the coalition promised to recommit the national money to the National Community Crime Prevention Program, and I believe that we'll be doing the same in the upcoming election because we believe it's very important for the Commonwealth Government to use the resources at its disposal to secure our streets as best to make our contribution to securing our streets. We will pursue real action to boost crime fighting and to do all we can at the Commonwealth level to fight crime. Mr Deputy Speaker, unfortunately, just as the same as Labor is all talk and no action in Western Australia, Labor is all talk and no action within my electorate of Stirling. And we will change that again once the government changes. I just wanted to turn very briefly to my portfolio. And the issue I was raising then about crime rates within my community is very important because, of course, what the Commonwealth is doing, the Commonwealth doesn't have primary responsibility for local crime fighting, but the Commonwealth does have significant responsibilities to do all they can to protect our borders. We know very well about their failure in border protection, about the flow of illegal boats that has resulted from Labor's changes to our robust border protection system when they came into office. But there's another, I think, issue that's less focused on, and that is that they are failing to protect our borders from illicit drugs. They are failing to protect our borders from illegal weapons. They are failing to stop illicit cargo coming into this country at both our ports and our airports because they have massively cut funding for the Australian Customs and Border Protection Service to run those checks. Air cargo inspections are down a staggering 75% because of the budget cuts that Labor have introduced since they came into office. Sea cargo inspections are down 25%. So what that means is it's easier for organised crime to smuggle things into Australia. So our border protection failure, or the Labor Party's border protection failure, is not just their failure to dissuade people smugglers from bringing people down to Australia illegally, but it's a failure to do their job to fight local crime, which is to stop illegal substances, illegal weapons coming onto our streets in the first place. You can't trust these guys with any national security issue, and I think the Prime Minister has shown through her behaviour that she really doesn't see her role in national security as one of her primary considerations. She didn't even bother turning up for National Security Committee of Cabinet. When she came to office as Prime Minister, she astonishingly axed the Border Protection Committee of Cabinet. So she said this was going to be one of her priorities, and her first act was to axe the Cabinet Committee that actually looks at border protection. So, Mr Speaker, Labor's failure within my portfolio has been enormous. Every frontline national security agency received a cut in this budget. The Australian Federal Police, every single one of our intelligence agencies, the Australian Customs and Border Protection Service, the Australian Crime Commission. So there's 24,000 extra public servants since the Labor Party came to office, and of course there's less frontline personnel dealing with national security and crime issues, which is a good indication that they just don't have the right priorities for our country. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is a budget that failed Australia, but it also failed Western Australia and it failed my electors in Stirling. They will be the ones, the hard-working people in my suburbs, they will be the ones who will be called on to pay Labor's debt. And of course, this is a shameful wasted opportunity for the country.